Oh, great. Okay, all right, we're all here. So we have 2, 4, 6, 8 of us or so in here. Massimo in, where are you, Massimo? In Norway, yeah?
In Bergen.
Bergen, Norway. And John Hughes Clark, Tony Lyons, and myself, the committee here, and 2 other committee members, Jen Dykstra, who is on the Isle of Shoals, and Rick Signal is somewhere, but has joined us virtually. So I want to welcome everybody to a long awaited event, which is the defense of Massimo Di Stefano's thesis. Massimo joined us in 2014, Massimo? 2014 you started this. I don't think you have the record. I think there are others that took a little longer, but you were getting there. And Massimo got a master's degree from, this is going to be good, the Università degli Studi di Napoli Parthenope. How is that?
I'll have him pronounce it.
Tell us what it really is supposed to be.
Yeah, it's Parthenope. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Okay, and I actually met Massimo at a meeting up in Maine somewhere. It must have been about 2011 or so, something like that. Well, Massimo was kind of a legend amongst the free software, the open software crowd. Working at Woods Hole, and before that, Rensselaer Polytech, right? Both on coding problems at Woods Hole on the habitat issue, and I know that RPI was also on habitat problems too.
RPI was about reproducibility of science.
Reproducibility of science. Okay. Yeah, so it's not the Christus, not more coming in. So you're gonna have to speak up and speak slowly when you speak. Okay, so what we'd like to do now is have Massimo give a presentation, 20 to 30 minutes or so. Is that your plan for time, Massimo?
That's fine.
Yeah, and then what we'll do is we'll turn the floor over for questions from both the committee and the public. And those of you virtually can submit the questions in writing, or if it's not too complicated, we can turn people on their audio on individually if you raise your hand. Right? It's a little complicated because we don't see it directly here. We have to run to the back of the room. We'll have to run to the back of the room to see that. And then after that,
you're fine.
no, after that, we'll probably excuse everybody, and the committee will have a debate, and then Massimo will probably just sign you out and then reconnect with maybe a Teams call or something. That would be easiest because we just have this one Zoom session.
I was just gonna mute us.
Yeah, that's probably better. Okay, so I think with that, let me turn the floor over to Massimo. We'll talk about his thesis integrating multiple data sets for seafloor characterization and habitat mapping. Massimo, go forward. And again, slowly, please.
So
You can take more time if you speak slower.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. So the title of my thesis is Integrating Multiple Datasets for Seafloor Characterization and Habitat Mapping. Mapping the seafloor and its features require collecting and analyzing datasets of various types and at various scales. These include remote sensing data, model data, both covering large areas such as bathymetry, acoustic backscatter, ocean dynamics, as well as direct observation or in situ data, covering very small areas like points, such as seafloor images and other oceanographical measurements, including physical samples. In this research, the case is made that by currently analyzing some or all of these datasets, knowledge about the seafloor processes is gained more efficiently. I first developed techniques and tools to interact and extract information from each data type. In the process, I discuss issues of geomorphometry, geomorphology, and habitat distribution. Secondly, I use data fusion techniques, some space and time indexing, to combine those diverse data sets to finally create a more comprehensive, hopefully, and accurate representation of the available information by leveraging the strength of each single data set. I will focus on this part of the presentation on remote sensing and in situ observation. So my objectives, so how bathymetric digital models and their derivatives can be used to characterize quantitatively and objectively elements of the seafloor. What are the limitations while doing that? How to integrate remote sensing and direct observation to increase our understanding of processes on the seafloor? And how direct observation, like seafloor images, as an example, can be used to correlate remotely sensed data from the multibeam with physical properties of the seafloor, and how to integrate all this information to build a synoptic view of the seafloor. What can be gained from the integration, like concurrent analysis of multiple data sets? My study, my research focused on an area located on the western boundary of Georges Bank, 50 nautical miles east of Nantucket Island, and in the proximity of the west side of the Great South Channel, the southern border of the Gulf of Maine. More in detail, Georges Bank is a relatively shallow bank made of mostly of glacial debris transported by the continent into the Pleistocene, and is constantly reworked by strong M2 tidal currents. Due to interaction of a complex current system and its bathymetry, Georges Bank is one of the most productive shelf ecosystem in the whole world. In 2015, and in 2017, I conducted two multi-beam surveys using a reason seabed operated at 400 kilohertz. And in addition, I also had access to some USBL data, some multi-beam data collected in the 98 from the USGS that was collected with the EM1000 at 100 kilohertz. In particular, for the survey in the 2015, I consider a little experiment. So I was running 11 parallel tracks with a very close spacing of 20 meters apart. This idea was to collect enough data with some redundancy, so to be able to relate the images with the features, if any, found in the multibeam. For the image collection, the survey included the acquisition of continuous ribbon of still stereographic photos from a towed camera, which is the HubCam version 4. This towed camera is usually towed at 5 to 6 knots. It's flying at 2 to 3 meters from the seafloor and collects around 6 frames per second with a number of other sensors on board, like temperature, salinity, chlorophyll, and other. The HubCam V4 is owned by the NOAA fisheries and is used to collect data all around the east coast of US. In this slide, you can see an overlay of the survey lines conducted with the HubCam since the 2012. And this is a little zoom, so they have also some hotspot where they map with the camera more intensively. And this is the area where we stopped to collect my experiment data. The co-registration of the images and the acoustic data was possible by deploying an ultra-short baseline USBL as underwater positioning system, which provides an accurate tracking of the HubCam. This was also the first and only time that the HubCam before was geolocated with an USBL. The system was calibrated at the beginning of the cruise by deploying a beacon on the seafloor at around a depth of around 60 meters, performing a static calibration using the 4 cardinal points scheme, which was possible thanks to the dynamic position of the Sharp, the vessel where I was on board during my cruise. The USBL transducer was installed on the second drop-down keel of the Sharp, while the pinger was mounted on top of the frame of the hubcam. To do that, we had to develop at CCOM a custom plate to the mounting of the USBL, and then learn about the calibration, because it was a device that was new to me. So the study area covered an approximate area of 3 square kilometers with an average depth of 75 meters, and was gently deepening towards the west with an absolute difference in depth of around 30 meters. Due to strong tidal regime, all fine sediment in the area is washed away by currents, and leaving the seabed covered by a superficial layer of coarse-grained sand and gravel. In such an environment, well-distinguished bed forms such as ripples, megaripples, and sand waves are common. In particular, let's see, in particular, this large-scale bed form attracted my attention. I found them really fascinating. They have a straight crest. They present depression on the horn on the sides, and I wasn't sure about the process maintaining them. All I knew was that they were subject to a strong tidal regime. They were asymmetric and probably moving fast. So I started to look into way on to classify them. At the beginning, I thought that they were some sort of Balkan dunes. I really wasn't an expert on bed form. So I started to study the relationship between the measurements like length, height, width. But soon enough, I had to rethink my hypothesis because of their shape, which was not matching the one of a Balkan. It had a straight crest, no lunar shape, and had this deep depression on the side. So I decided to refer to them as, so I gave them a name, large, straight, isolated platforms. But then I knew that some other in the field, they call like a whaleback. Yeah, so this effort of measuring them led me to start exploring methods for the quantitative characterization of terrain features. I applied geomorphometry methods for my surface analysis. In particular, I was interested in quantify in an objective way a particular element of the seabed, in this case, those bed forms. So by extracting topographic terrain features from the bathymetry. As tool for the landform extraction, I chose an approach which is based on the texture analysis. It's called geomorphon, and was firstly available in the GraphJS software. However, this technique of extracting terrain features are very sensitive to input parameters. So in order to get a grasp of the tool and understand the behavior of the model at the changing of parameters, I start to run simulation, choosing a range of parameters, pre-generating the results of the model, and then put them in a user interface which allowed me to explore how the model was changing by changing the parameters. So this allowed me to fine-tune the model to isolate and extract the main terrain features that I was interested on, which I then used as an input in a spatial analysis workflow, which I call here GRM, which stands for the GIS rule-based model. It's just a workflow of a sequence of routine geospatial analysis on the features. First raster and then vector. This was to provide an objective and quantitative characterization of the LSI bed form as final output. I will try now to describe the steps in the GRM. So I was first running the geomorphon for the extraction of the bed form crest, which is the red thick line on the first figure. And then using a command to thin these features. So extract the crest, and use command to decrease the size to reduce it to a linear shape, still a raster, but with a 1 pixel width. So after this thinning, I run some clumping, which means recategorize the raster cell from physically discrete areas into unique categories, so to assign a distinct color and a distinct category to each element in the feature, so that I was able to filter by length. In this way, I was going to extract only what I thought was the crest of the bedform. After that, I switched to vector, so I vectorized the raster feature, so the conversion from raster to vector. And at this point, I ran some topological cleaning on the vector features. So it's cleaned by removing the dangle or the strong turns in the residual of the rasterization, actually. Then I ran a smoothing, and so with a low-pass filter, I used to obtain a vectorized sine wave bedform crest. After the vectorization of the crest, I then rerun the geomorphon with a different set of parameters. This was to extract the main area, so the body of the bedform, by some algebra on the map. I reclassify the area. Then I rerun this clumping. So I categorize the area, and this time the filter is not by length, but by the extent of the area. So I get rid of all the small part of the surface that they were not of interest. After this removing, I fill the body of the bedform. And finally, I run a vectorization on so I transform to vector this part of the raster. So the wave body now is a vector, and we have the crest, which is also a vector. And I simply run an overlay between the two. After the overlay, I clip all the features that are not falling in the area of the bedform. Then I run some buffering on the crest, and I use the results of the buffer to split the bedform area in two parts. Once this is done, I use the single parts of the bedform as a mask, and I run univariate analysis on the slope to try to understand the differences between the two sides. And this is to check if there is a asymmetry, and also to infer which part is the lee and which part is the stoss of the bedform. At this point, I run a number of perpendicular transect along the crest, and I run vertical profile on the terrain, on the bathymetry, in order to try to understand what is the highest difference in depth, so to capture the highest point of the bedform. In this way, I had the first measurement, which was the height. Then I use the slope, and I run just a straight line, and I compute the intersection between the terrain and this intersective plane to try to give a measurement for the width, so the width of the bedform. So at this point, I had enough elements to give a quantitative characterization of this bedform. And this routine was initially running in an electronic notebook, where there was little or no user interaction. So once you set the bounded box of the area of interest, it was trying to characterize the bedform. From the analysis, I start to, I focused on a number of key points, so 9 bedform. And here you can see the vertical profile on my control point. So with some measurements, I try to understand the processes associated with this bedform. Are they moving? How fast? And once these bedform are identified, the GRM approach was used to analyze this symmetry, which can give us some evidence of flow direction and speed. So they were indeed asymmetric, implying migration in a southward with a southward sediment transport. In particular, then I start to overlay. So this was still 2015, 2016. Then I had the second survey in 2017. And I start to overlay the data between the two surveys. And it's possible to notice some changes. So there are active sand waves with a height of up to 2 meters that is traveling on top of those bed forms. But during the oscillating tidal currents, in fact, you can see in this area here. In red, we have the 2017 survey, and in blue is the 2015. In this spot here, you have the vertical profile of the 2017-15, and underline is the 98 data from the USGS. They have quite a different resolution. My grid was 1 meter, and USGS, if I remember, is around 9 meters, the terrain. Here is another details. So it's a zoom profile, the comparison between 2015 and 17. And note what I was thinking was an artifact is repeated exactly in the two survey, the distance of 2 years. So this came up no longer as an artifact, but kind of a feature, probably a mark from some dredge activity. And this other slide, you can see the overlay between 2015 and the 98. I thought there is some vertical offset due to misaligned vertical references. And there is a huge spatial resolution difference, 1 meter vs 9. This is beginning to provide some evidence that those bed forms are probably not moving, or at least in the lapse of 20 years. By overlapping the multi-beam from the 2017 and the 98 backscatter mosaic, it's also possible to observe that the relative position between a number of those bed forms, it didn't change. So this comparison seems to confirm that at least in the 20 years, they didn't move. However, there is still not enough information to establish migration or immobility of those LSI bed forms. But it's clear that there is an overimposed fast-moving sediment layer on top of them. In order to explain the dynamics of this area, I then try to integrate the results from an FBCOM simulation over the period of 2 tidal cycles. I integrated the components of the currents at the bottom layer to compute them through tidal currents direction and amplitude. So the results returned a mean southward direction of around 0.6 meters per second as strength. And this was strong enough to mobilize fine to coarse sand, which can mean that those bed forms should be made of coarser material. So the next thing I wanted to do was to relate the images to those features. So before being able to look at HubCam images, I first had to solve some data synchronization issue. And all the system except the USBL, which was, they were connected to a time server over the network. But the USBL that I had in use was a control unit, was a portable unit without Ethernet. So I had to come up with a solution, which was just piping the raw data from the USBL to a serial connection in a laptop that was connected to the network and injecting the time from the time server. So this allowed me to synchronize data and to finally derive a corrected image location by joining the HubCam metadata and the USBL log. So in the 2015, in 4 hours of cruise, we collected over 60,000 images. So now the problem was to find a way to explore this, for me, huge data set. I went through trial and error, some attempts. So the first attempt consisted in converting all the images into a video stream, and then synchronize the video stream with a WebGL map canvas. In this case was CCOM-JHC, the tool that I used. and the moving object in the scene is based on a CZML format. It's like a format to describe a time dynamic in a graphics scene. After this approach, I went a little bit further, and as a second attempt, I tried to integrate the video streaming into a GIS platform, but I was really lacking the ability to click on a map and access the images at a given location, and the results of this approach were not very functional. In addition, any observation that I was making was hard to reproduce. Then my third attempt was to develop a standalone application where the image data were indexed by time, and this index was connected to a user interface component. So in this way, I was able to slide over and browse over all my images, and the application was sending over the network the position of the images to a number of map canvas in a spinning globe with 3D, which was receiving over the network the position. This was quite useful because I had like a number of map canvases, not just one. So I had the ability to look at different layers at the same time while browsing the images. All this image browsing, map panning, and zooming, along with handwritten notes while doing this, allowed me to describe the seafloor variability in the area surrounding the bed form. And I start to delineate different microhabitats associated with them. So on the basis of the images, I was able to distinguish up to 6 types of microhabitats around the bed form. The first split occurs between the stoss and the lee side of the terrain, where the stoss side with the very mobile sediment and higher abundance of flounder and other flat body fish. And on the lee side was where most biota could be found, particularly sessile fauna, including invasive tunicate like the dendum. And this relatively stable zone can stand up to 90 meters from the crest of the dune. So this spatial pattern needs to be tested, but essentially it means that this bed form may play an important ecological role. However, was still a big piece missing. I was lacking the ability to click on a map and access the images and the associated metadata. So I needed a bidirectionality between the browsing of the data. And also, I realized that I needed access to a spatial analysis tool. And this led to the development of a QGIS plugin, which allowed me to integrate all my data into a single application. This is so that's how the main results of this data fusion approach ended up in producing this QGIS plugin that I named Ground Router, which allowed me to synchronize image browsing and map canvas in both directions. So browsing images moves the map, click on the map, finds the closest image, based on a KD3 indexing of the image metadata. Then the QGIS feature of loading multiple map canvas in the same session was also extremely useful, as now I was able to put more data, like bathymetry, backscatter, vector layers, into the same context, without the needs of turning layers on and off, as I usually do in a GIS. So when I had this environment at hand, I started to integrate the tools for the analysis of my data. The first was a query builder, which essentially implements a fast point-in polygon analysis tool. And it's used to query a point cloud dataset. In my case, I used multi-beam backscatter information in this point cloud. And the polygon, so the point-in polygon is built using the image as a reference point, and then build a shape like an ellipse or a rectangle around the area. The user can select the sides of this clipping shape. And the resulting data is then rendered as a scatter plot for the acoustic, then for the amplitude vs the angle of incidence of the backscatter. Then there is a density plot for the distribution, a WebGL widget which shows you the surface in that area, and also all the images falling in the clipping area are collected so that can be analyzed. These are like some results that so how the tool can produce data sets. So I know it works. So the point cloud, I had a variable as field. You can select the field that you're interested on. Then you have the position, and you can choose what you want to represent in the graphical output, like the scatter plot and the density plot. Second was the report builder, which is part of the ground truther. So the selected images, the scatter plot, rich text annotation can be all stored and elaborated in this report tool, which allow to embed in a KML both the geospatial information and also a rich text annotation. So you can pass the plots automatically, pushing some buttons from the various widgets into this final report. Then I started to work on a geoprocessing engine, which is also integrated into the plugin. But this geoprocessing engine is more a user interface to access a number of geospatial analysis tools which are available on the network. So I developed a web API, a RESTful API container, which provides some methods for analysis. And this user interface is communicating over the network with this tool. So there are a number of workflow implemented. In this screenshot, you can see the GRM that we saw at the beginning of the slides is also implemented here. A little about the architecture of the tool. So the API, RESTful API, and behind the hood, we have tools like PDAL for the point cloud, GDAL for the geospatial input-output, GraphJS for the workflow, and MB System as a tool to import and process sonar data. So in conclusion, using spatial analysis to combine multiple geomorphometric outputs can improve the identification and quantitative description of bed form, especially those LSI bed form. But the methods can be applied to other elements of interest, implementing a different GRM. The accuracy of the georeferencing data of the seafloor images and generally any form of ground truth data is of paramount importance in seafloor characterization, mostly at this fine scale. And the ability to browse images interactively, so having control over the speed of browsing, the possibility to skip ahead and keep track of the index of the images, so go back on annotation, is crucial for the characterization of microhabitats. And spatially querying the acoustic backscatter data and images simultaneously is an effective method to relate the acoustic to the seafloor properties. So finally, the ability to concurrently analyze interlinked marine datasets, including ground truth data, has a great potential to significantly facilitate seafloor characterization and habitat mapping. And collecting direct observation of physical symbol of the seafloor, also known as ground truth, holds the key to interpret and validate remote sensing data. And with that, I want to thank my advisor, Larry, my committee, and a special thanks to Genoveva, Norman, Barton, Scott, and Peter. I don't know how we are with time, but I'm prepared if there is enough to also to show the tool in action, so that if this can be of interest.
I think we're fine. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So the tool is accessible from a toolbar on the top of the QGIS, and you have here the list of layers that I loaded, like the image metadata are here. So each point represents an image into the image metadata. And the first tool is the image browser, actually. So we have a slider here, which moving it, it will synchronize the panning and the zooming of the layer. But you can see you have the backscatter on the bottom and a shadow relief on the top. Yeah, this, yeah, that's better. Okay. So the browsing of the images and the synchronization is done with this check button. When that button is checked, you are free to browse just the images. There are some.
Massimo,
Sorry, Deb.
the upper left, you have the bathymetry and overlaying the bathymetry. Is that the image? The imagery? Is that what's the?
So those are points. So vector points.
Okay.
So each point is an image, correspond to an image.
So it's the position of the images. Okay.
Yes, that's correct. So that's the corrected position of the images. Like if I hit this on the toolbar, this like pointer here, and I go here, it will browse to the closest images. And yeah, there we go. So the screen ratio is now completely off. So I had to zoom out in order to give you an idea. So you can click here and you can turn the zoom based on the ground router here. And let's say I click in this area, it will find the closest image to where I'm clicking. And the browser here will update the relative images. Then you have a tool to enhance the images like histogram stretching. You have access to the metadata of the image. So when you browse, also the metadata are updated. And if the image has annotation, you also have a count on the species and the classes, which is showed here. And so let's remove so when you uncheck this button, you can remove just the images and leave just the tool. And that's the report builder, which I was talking before. And this is the query builder, which has access to the parameters to choose between shapes for the sampling of the multi-beam. And yeah, you can see it generates like an ellipse, in this case of 15 meters, 5 meters on the minor axis. And you can change the orientation, like we'll put it to straight 0. And when you click here, it will regenerate the shape. And I'm trying to put this up. So these are the selected point. This is the scatter plot for the area that is selected. That's the surface which represents this little area. That's the density plot, which doesn't show very well into the resolution of the screen. You can see that the density plot is made with like a standard histogram, or you can group the data based on the survey line. Yeah,
the scatter plot you showed.
Yeah.
Was that an angular dependence curve or?
Yes. So it all depends on the data used as input. But in that plot, you have the angle on the x-axis, the angle of incidence, and the amplitude on the y-axis.
Yeah, let me ask you another question while you're doing that. Yeah. When you had the images up, you said if they were annotated, you'd see the annotation, but can you annotate from the tool?
So no, you can query the annotation, and you can
query annotation, but can you actively annotate? If you say if you want to label something a starfish or something like that.
Yeah, you cannot assign labels, okay, but you can select the label. So the labeling was made with a different application. So and the input format of the labeling is generated from transforming the results of a trained neural network. So it's mostly used to validate the resulting of the annotation. I still have to go into the tools that are needed to edit those annotations. So this means that is on the roadmap to have access to the annotation in a way that you can edit them. And most work was done on cleaning now for this data that I had at hand. Okay, so I try to extract only the detachable tab from the QGIS because was too much for the size of the screen, so I wasn't able to use it. And now I started from scratch. So there you go. So you have the image browsing, and when you click here, you have access to the annotation, which are loaded by a file which is in a COCO format, which is a common format in the deep learning, or in Pascal box. And those annotation, I have two different datasets. One is a hand-made annotation at CCOM, and the other one is auto-generated from a neural network, which is developed by by people at Kitaware. It's called Viame, the framework that they were using. And yeah, so this is the widget for the Angular response. And this is, so you have access to some tool to interact with the data. So you can not just pan and zoom, you can downsample the data, you can run some filter. And I was playing around with the data in the case that you can also try to fold all when there is not enough information, I try to fold the data so that I was trying to get a more comprehensive understanding of the distribution of the backscatter. For the density plot, what I was mentioning is that you can have a standard density plot, or you can group based on a category in the input data. In this case, my category is the survey line, so that I was trying to understand if the direction of the survey was affecting what I was seeing in the backscatter. And this is normalized, so, and then this is scaled based on how much pin there are for each line. And then the image selection, so those are all the images falling in the sampling ellipse that I ran before, so that you can also have a look at this. In the report builder here, so if I go in the HARA and I save the graph, and I go in the report builder and I click here, I can add the selected images. Very hard to find the.
And all these other parameters, salinity, temperature, O2, and things like that, they're coming.
Yes, so you have access when you click here, and you can let's say remove images here, and I click one more, then you can add images that you are watching in the browser. And associated with the images, there are all the metadata which are stored like this.
That's coming from HabCam.
Yes, that's from the HabCam. Well, if you click here, you have you can store the graph from the scatter plot, and then you have like rich text editing things, because to build the report can be proven to be.
And can you extract, if you want to just extract temperature and look at the distribution of temperature? Geospatially?
No, all the metadata that are visible here. So this widget is built on the fly based on the image metadata. So all this information is available in the metadata, and that's where you have like a chlorophyll, oxygen. What I add in the report builder is a selection of those fields. So I chose this. So it's a configuration in the app where you can choose what to store in the report builder. And on top here, you have access to the KML feature, like it's a point. You can assign colors for the vector feature that is created, and you can extrude it so in a way that shows off from the terrain. I usually use this in a Google Earth environment because it allows me to click on the pop-up and have access to this report in the same environment. Yeah, so then this one instead is the tool which is accessing the geoprocessing. So you have access to the geomorphology, the R-param scale. Those are two different ways to extract terrain features. One is based on differential geometry, the R-param scale, and the other one is based on texture analysis, the geomorphology. And instead here you have the GRM, which we ran before, with all the parameters that I'm using to extract.
These are based on that ellipse. This is done within the ellipse you defined before?
No, so this works in this way. So you have, I will move this away this time and put this here. So you have another tool here, which is rectangle selector, like to select an area. So I zoom out and I go in one of my bed form and I click here. Let's say I want to do this polygon here. So now I selected an area. The red box now represents the computational region in a GraphJS session, which is running in a server in Germany. And because that's the API which I was talking about. Now that we have this computational region selected, I can run the geomorphology, make sure that overwrite the file. And I forgot to click here. So this will add the output.
All right, are you ready for questions?
Yeah.
Well, John, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, there's different aspects to this. I thought I'd start off with sort of the 2018 origins. That is, you're doing these terrain feature extraction, and you tested 3 different models, A, B, C, and kind of came to the conclusion that C worked best. But what you're classifying are LSIs. They're large, they're solitary, and they're isolated. And the continental shelf isn't full of those. You mentioned in your paper that the other 2 models were much more sensitive to artifacts in the multi-beam data. When you go from a 60-meter bed form to the bed forms in the foreground there that are just 1 or 2 meters high, how do you think this terrain feature extraction would work in areas that don't have enormous solitary bed forms?
Yes.
But are much smaller and are like our typical surveys full of artifacts.
Yeah, so the GRM that I worked is specifically designed with this large bed form. But I also tried, it's not published, but I had some attempt like to identify a ripple field in the with an amplitude of variable of like 1 meter tall. And in that case, the R-param scale was performing well instead of the geomorphology. But what I did in that case to try to extract the polygon, which was covering the ripple field, was to playing with the ridge and valley, masking all the rest, splitting the H linear feature in points, and then run a window to compute the density of those points. In this way, I was able to remove from the equation what I consider was an artifact of the same amplitude. And another attempt that I did was to work with POCMAP. And in that case, also a completely different spatial routine needs to be developed. So it's all like trial and error on one single feature, which represents what I wanted, what is my interest, and playing around with that. For the LSI, I also have to run the geomorphon twice with different set of parameters in order to mask out what I was not interested in. But for sure, the bigger, the higher is the differences between the landscape, the easiest and more possible is this approach. If it's too heterogeneous and the things that I'm interested on are on a scale are very close to other things, then it starts to be very hard.
Okay, I'll just follow that with who's actually using it, or do you think should be using it? Is the Norwegian Geological Survey, for example, thinking of applying this to the entire, they have the luxury of Mariano.
Yeah, actually,
yeah,
the second, one of my co-authors in Ground Truther, Genoveva, she's involved in Mariano project. They are now trying to extract frames from the video because they use a similar approach of it's not very similar, but it's still images, but from video. So they have a tripod, which is goes deep into the sea, and they try to analyze the video. But in fact, one of the things that I was interested on is to add capabilities to extract videos. So to work with videos inside the ground truth. Who is going to use it? It's a good question. I remember the words of a friend at NOAA when I was on my third attempt. So this application, he's working at NOAA with the fisheries and was leading actually the cruise of the HubCam. And he said, I never saw those data in this context. So that gave me a big punch in pursuing this approach, because I think it was useful.
Okay, I have other questions.
We got one from Jen in the virtual world. Let's get that. You can always keep coming back to us. So Jen asks, it's actually similar to the question I asked. Can you extract an environmental variable and either create a profile or a heat map? So in your metadata, you have all those environmental variables. Can they be extracted and so you can look at them geospatially in a heat map or as a profile or something?
Yes. So in one tool that I forgot to show here, there is a table. Like, see if it, yeah. So this is connected to the server where the GrassJS is running. And every time that you run a command, like the one that we saw before, is generating data. So those are like the intermediate output of the geomorphon, but also some terrain variables like profile curvature and other predictors for modeling. And you can query those data based on point and clicks and on a moving window. For now, there's just a nearest neighbor, like you can choose just the sides of the width, like 3 by 3, 5 by 5, and extract the data from that window. But it's quite easy to implement a method on those windows, like give me the mean, the mode, or some other kind of processing. And this was actually very useful because the data that is generated sometimes is really a lot. And having the ability to query the data without loading them into the GIS and without like clicking and pointing and selecting the information, that was useful. Like so the tool is designed to build a feature vector, I call it like that, because you can traverse the selected layer and then store the information of your sampling point in a table, which then can be used in modeling for like habitat suitability indexes or other random forest or whatever.
I have a ton of questions. We'll just spend an hour with. Massimo, could you go to your, all the way back to near the beginning, slide 2 or 3, where you have your bullets about what you want to your goals.
Which slide?
I'm actually looking at your wrapper document.
Oh, okay.
But in your wrapper document, you have a couple of bullets which I thought would say you can use, one bullet is you can use combination, integration of visual and geomorphological information to characterize ecological units at seascape at the micrographic level. And the third bullet was how can image data be used? And you wanted one of your objectives, how can image data be used to help understand remotely sense physical properties of the seafloor? How are those different? What do you mean by that second one? And what physical properties are you talking about?
Okay, yeah. There is a point that I wanted to reach, which I didn't. And so for what we know about the acoustic of the seafloor, one of the measurements is related to roughness. And from a look at the images, it's not that we can detect the roughness, but at least we can try to understand what we are looking at. And one of the key of the HubCam is that it had like stereo pair images, and is still in a box somewhere in my computer. The routine to create a surface map from the images, and then with that surface we can try to understand the rugosity, the roughness of the image. And I was thinking that this information can somehow related to the measurements given from the backscatter. One limitation in my use case was the data itself. Was like a 400 kilo. Sorry.
Data itself. Okay.
Yeah, it was a 400 kilohertz backscatter, and there was not too much variability. The system was not calibrated. So in order to be sure of what we say about the properties of the seafloor and the acoustic, we know we need to have a calibrated instrument. So what I did is to provide the tool that could be useful to do that, but I didn't do it.
So you talk about backscatter quite a bit. You actually just pull it into the third paper and at the end to say, oh, look, I can look at things in the same spatial reference. So my question is actually sort of a general, it's similar to the one I just asked you. It's about backscatter. So your title is Integrating Multiple Data Sets for Seafloor Characterization and Habitat Management. How would you include backscatter? You can pull it in, you can relate it spatially, but how would you actually use it?
Yeah, so I used the tool also to validate what I learned about the backscatter. So I try to see how the distribution of the backscatter was behaving in specific area where was my thought there should be a different distribution, and see if those things that I learned reflected in the real data. Like I was zooming into regions where there were ripples, and I started to see how the distribution of the backscatter looked like. And then I found parts of the terrain with ripples of the same amplitude, but from the images, I was looking at different sediment in the trough, and I tried to explore the backscatter to see if what I noticed in the images was visible in the distribution.
So you would use it qualitative, not really quantitative.
No, for the data that I had at my hand, I was only able to do some qualitative assessment.
But your idea was to use real levels and distributions to match.
Yeah, in reality, also the design of the survey with this huge overlap of transect was just to construct a good point cloud so that I was able to see from a different angle the same spot of the seafloor. And also the use of the USBL was to make sure that I was looking at the same spot where the acoustic was pointing.
But Massimo, you keep using the word point cloud, and I think you're really referring to the angular response.
Yes, that is correct. I use point cloud. Yeah.
So in terms of the question, in terms of habitat mapping and characterization, would you use those real values if you trusted them and you have good data? Would you use those to do segmentation? In a similar way that you use the geomorphons, would you use the backscatter as a separate data stream to match in a segmentation way to see if they overlaid or didn't overlay your geomorphon?
I use the geomorphon mostly to identify what I call is an element of the seascape. But it's true that you can use a polygon. In this case, was just an ellipse, but you can select a point, a polygon, so a feature from the output of geomorphon to see how the backscatter is behaving. But was not my objective to use it in a quantitative way with the backscatter.
Do you think you would do that in the future?
I hope so. And actually, one of my not dream, but I had a chance to talk with some people at one of the GeoHub, which they had a reason multi-beam calibrated at CCOM. This was 2019, and they were offering the instrument to go and collect some data. But then the survey didn't happen. This was just before the pandemic. But yes, I'd love to.
I'll take a break.
Yeah, let me throw one in from Jere again. In your second paper describing faunal differences with landform characteristics, did you run any community statistics that show differences in faunal composition and their relationship to landforms?
No. The assessment of the habitat was really like empiric, like by observation. I literally spent hours going back and forward in this area up to a point that while I was browsing the images without looking at the map, I knew where I was, and then just to convalidate that. But no, that's a very fine scale analysis. So I didn't do any statistics on. Also, the number of bed form that I had at hand, they were a very like tiny strip of land. So there were like 9, and only 3 of them, they were this isolated bed form. So having a much wider data set, then it will make sense more to do a statistical analysis on.
Yeah, Massimo, you keep on, in your third paper, the draft of it, you keep on emphasizing this oscillatory pattern in the backscatter angular response. And I think, I'm not convinced that the grazing angle calculation is actually being done here. Can you comment, what is this oscillatory pattern, and should we see it as important, or is it a problem with the data?
Okay. The only thing that I'm sure is that I applied a grid to the computation of the R analysis into Chimera. So I make sure that there was a reference grid. So I assume that the compensation for the flat seafloor was made. I have in plan, that's why also MB system and these other tools are on this geoprocessing engine. I want to open the box and make sure and to know what's happening to the data. So the only things that I know is that I applied a reference grid to the computation of the area. Now the tool can be also used.
If I could interrupt and follow up on that, what's the scale of the grid relative to the scale of the backscatter data?
What is the size of the grid?
The spatial scale of the grid versus
so
resolution of the backscatter data you're looking at.
The terrain was gridded at 1 meter, while for the mosaic, I had a very density point, which allowed to grid it at 50 centimeters. But the distance between beams can reach a couple of decimeters.
I think it's pretty clear that the black box, as you say, from Chimera is not accounting for grazing angle, because there's no physical mechanism to have.
And I agree. And this was actually confirmed from the, if you see the third paper, at the beginning there were 4 points, A, B, C, and D. The D1 was made on top of a crest, and it was showing a bimodal distribution of the backscatter. And I went to check on the backscatter, and it clearly gives data that seems to be affected by the slope of the bedroom.
Okay, I mean, this is, I think the point is you're building the tool, whether the data that goes into it is reduced usefully is a separate question. I jump for another question though. You keep on talking about the lee and stoss side of these bed forms, and you point out that there is a residual subtidal current to the south, and therefore stoss is to the north. But they're obviously reversing currents, but you go on to talk about this, the great diversity on the lee side, because, I mean, these are your words, you say the boulders can accumulate because they're sheltered. I don't think boulders accumulate, especially at 60 centimeters a second. Do you want to tell us how you think that lee side lacks the finer grains, well, finer coarse sand? How is it that the boulders are there? I don't think they're accumulating or concentrating. What is the mechanism that is removing all the coarse sand from the, as you call it, the lee side, the south side of these large, solitary, isolated bedforms?
So I got this idea by observing the backscatter of the 98, which was clearly showing a different value on the stoss side of the bedroom. Then I observed the shape of all these bedforms, and you can find ripples on the stoss, but not after in the lee. And having a look at the images, all the part of the lee is where you find the more stable substrate. So you find like sessile individuals like anemones, some clothing, and was towards the depression where I was able to see boulders and much bigger structure. And I think the current is strong enough to dig around those bedforms, and just for gravity, things are falling in that area, because also these big residuals, they were covered by sand. Like I found in the images like a boulder, but on top of the boulder was like a sponge, and the sponge presented like fine-grained sediment on top. But you can see that it is moving, so it's not that stays there. It's the current is washing those and putting other sediment on top and then washing.
I think when you describe it as a sheltered environment, but I think it's, you also describe the flood tide as much stronger but shorter lived. I think that's what's actually washing the sand out. I don't think it's sheltered. I think it's basically it's deflated. Anyway, I was just curious of your discussion. Yeah. Certainly, you're right that a stable area where you have these hard substrates can be a magic ecologically. I'm not a biologist. So I'll pass it on to another person.
Yeah, Rich has a question. Which is his second part is a great follow-up of yours. But the first question, so far, pretty well covered questions of mine.
Yeah.
What were the next steps you would take to make these tools, one, more accessible to researchers, and two, more able to be maintained, extended by the community?
That's a very good observation about it. So I've been busy with dissertation and writing, so I didn't spend too much for the documentation. But I have a meeting with the backscatter working group people, and this software will be moved under the GitHub organization there, so to have a little bit more visibility. And I want to know from other developers that can be involved into improve the robustness of the tool first, and then add all the tools that I still have to add, because there is a number of features that are not in, but the code is ready. What I'm going to do next is to write the documentation. And once that is done, then I plan to move the repository in a much more visible environment. The thing is that because it's a QGIS plugin, it's already been accepted by the QGIS community, so it's already available in an official repository. And when you load the plugin, it's written that it's experimental. And in the README, there are all the links to point to the future documentation. So hopefully. And I also added with the associated DOI for the third paper, a test data set, which include a subsample of the images, the backscatter, the acoustic, and the terrain is all compacted in a tarball, in a zip file, so that people can also use the tool to explore the functionalities, also if you do not have access to those data already.
It would be nice if somebody like the Norwegian Geologic Survey did start adopting this and then arrange for a short, workshop or a short course or something that could train them.
That will definitely happen.
And Rich had a what he calls a science sidebar, and it says, what do you think would happen if you remove the top 2 meters of sand from an LSI?
Oh, it's actually, I don't need to remove it. I just need to go and survey deeper towards the center of the Great South Channel. And I can see, at least from the 98, that there is much less, so the gravel lag is more exposed. And I really still do not know what those bed forms really are. I'm in touch with the community, the Marvid, which they are studying those bed forms, and I'm trying to have a better understanding, just talking with you now and with them later on. Yeah.
Okay, Tony, do you have
it seems like Rich is hit on one of mine, John DeWitt, but I still have a couple. Yeah. So
see if you guys cover everything.
So it seems like, as John pointed out, these LSIs are difficult things. And it looked to me, I don't know exactly, it looked to me like you did a lot of tuning of all your parameters to analyze that one sort of specific environment. So how much tuning, if you want in general, can you automate it, or is there a lot of tuning to go to a completely different environment with different habitats?
Yeah, so since I moved into the GIS environment, I start to find a lot of weakness into the DRM. And mostly was the assumption that there are just 2 main slopes, because one of the most difficult things is to select the bounding box with the area of the analysis, because sometimes those dunes are, those platforms are very close to each other. So you risk to go into one other when you draw the box in order to capture just one. So the first thing will be to turn the tool, the GRM, in a way to exclude this situation. And the tuning of the parameter now is all about not the geomorphon, but more about the threshold for the area, for the length. Those are the thresholds that one has to play more with. As we said before, for this bed form, it's not that hard. So it worked with a number of bed forms that I had at hand. So it requires learning. So for the parameters, but there are not too many. Like there are just the area threshold, the length threshold, and then the flatness. So those three are the key that one can pay. Then there is the problem of the computational region, because I'm using a rectangle, and this can behave very odd when it overlaps another unit. But the computational region in GLASS, you can use a raster mask, which I never tried in this case. In a raster mask, then you have more like freehand digitizing, and will make the tool a little bit more robust.
So this takes a lot of human interaction to do all this.
Yes, it cannot be run in one single run like automatically. So the point here was to build an objective way so that when I was thinking that they were Barkhan's dunes, I started to measure the length and measure the height, and I didn't know where the highest point was. And the length once was a couple of meters. The second time I was measuring it, and I got another result. So it's not that I want to be like an automatic way, but I want to be repeatable and objective, so that it's not subject to errors of the user that is quantifying those measurements. And
one of my questions too, is just how much manual interaction was there? At one point you implied you do the rectangle and it'll calculate it.
Yeah, in this case was the only manual interaction is the draw a rectangle. And that's it.
That's the problem. Okay, so if you kind of visually observe a distinct feature, you can draw the rectangle and everything is calculated automatically.
That's correct.
But is it conceivable that that can be extended to kind of growing rectangle that will at some point capture what it thinks is a bed form, so that you can start doing large areas without having to individually select each feature? That it'll start.
Yes. Yes. And there is one way to do it, is to understand the patterns of the geomorphon output. In fact, actually, it's the author of the geomorphon itself is using this routine in landscape ecology, because you have like a sequence that is very well defined of a crest and two slope. And that's the pattern of this bed form. And this can be understood in a more automated way. So that then the tool can go, and where this pattern is found, then we'll run the box and grow and shrink. I cannot hear.
Massimo,
Yep.
I actually did not go back and find this paper, but I know it exists because when Giuseppe was here, he was doing similar sort of derivatives of bathymetry kind of work. How is what you're doing different than what Giuseppe did?
Okay, so the geomorphon is exactly the same. The approach is the same that Giuseppe used, for what I know. The main difference was that he decreased the number of classes as output, like there is no pit and no peak in breasts. I think you refer to breasts. And when I first saw geomorphon, I actually pointed Giuseppe to geomorphon.
Okay, John, did you?
Just the last one there, you talked about this layback model, which you tuned because you had a USBL. You showed us a figure of National Marine Fisheries have been towing the HabCam everywhere.
Yes.
After they don't use a USBL most of the time, any of the time, do they actually use your layback model? because you've emphasized how important it is to
Yep.
locate those photographs on short wavelength topography. Is that actually being used, or is there an intention to use it with the HabCam in the future?
For sure, I was able to. So I didn't mention the model in the slides because it didn't fit into the paper. But it was actually a huge achievement for me to do that model. Yes, but I know that the model is going to be developed also in Florida, where I'm in touch with other people that are doing habitat mapping with another towed camera. So they asked me the approach. We met at the GeoHub last year in Venice, and they were planning a survey to do the calibration and to apply the same method. About the HabCam, I just need to give them the model because it's still like in my hands, and then we can rectify at least the data that is coming from 2012. Because the model is developed for the HabCam and for the Sharp. So the vessel needs to be the same, the camera needs to be the same in order to use the model. And yeah, I've been in touch with the people at NOAA so that they can reuse it. And I also like to improve the image annotation tools because they also have much more annotation available. And it's my interest to this exchange of data.
Just a quick, a minor kind of sidebar question. I was intrigued by the fact that you said those weren't bark ants. I saw them. They look just like bark ants to me. What made them not bark ants?
Mostly the lack of lunar shape, and because the straight crest and the depression.
I can concentrate. Really look quite crescent shaped, but maybe a lot of them were quite much straighter than that.
This is, I think, at this point is speculation, so I'm not sure about. So it needs more investigation. But to me, those features, they seem submerged into the sediment. So maybe some piston core or whatever can tell us a little bit more. Maybe they were barkans, but ideally, in my head, I was thinking more of a tidal bank, which is now like dismantled, when the seafloor was much lower.
But so this leads up to if you're doing this quantitative description of the features, you're building a database of features and descriptions. If you're kind of building a front end for a machine learning approach to this too. Do you think that would be conceivable, that you know after some manual interaction you start identifying different types of features? You say, oh, these are bark ants, these are whalebacks, these are ripples, things like that. You now have the constraints of dimensions and angular relations and things like that you should be able, one would hope, to start having automatically detected. It's kind of a variation of the question.
Yeah, it didn't show the same relationship of a beacon. Like when I did the plot, putting some relationship between height, length, and width, they were on a line. Like a linear model, a model can fit those bed forms very well at a different scale. So there is a clear relationship between those measurements, and we see, which is actually what is done for to study the beacon. And yes, the name ground truther is made also because it can be used to validate remote sensing, but also to train unsupervised model to.
Okay, all right. It's the timing is good because at 4:30, which is now, our computer system is supposed to go down for maintenance. But don't hold on, just don't worry. So if there are no more questions out in the virtual world, and no more questions in here, okay, then we'll have a little quiet applause from here, and I'm sure it'll be a raw applause.
Thank you.